I was standing in the middle of my brand new living room, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and the smell of fresh floor wax, when my phone vibrated with a call from the one person I never expected to hear from again. It was Miller, the man who had sold me this house just 3 weeks ago. His voice wasn't friendly, and he wasn't calling to check in on how we were settling. He sounded like he was hyperventilating. He told me that he had accidentally left an old, high-end security feed active, one tucked away where nobody would ever look, and that what he had just seen on his tablet made him feel physically sick. He told me if I didn't come to his apartment right now, without telling my wife a single word, I was going to lose everything I owned before the month was over. I had no idea that walking out that front door was the last time I'd ever look at my marriage the same way again. Before I tell you what was on that video and how it turned my life into a high-stakes game of survival, do me a huge favor. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below letting me know where in the world you're watching from. I love seeing our community grow across the globe, and it really helps the channel out. The drive to Miller's place felt like it took hours, even though it was only 10 minutes down the road. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what could possibly be so urgent. Maybe there was a leak in the foundation? Maybe he'd left something valuable in the walls? But his tone hadn't been about the house. It had been about me. When I reached his apartment, he didn't even offer me a seat. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. He flipped his laptop around and pressed play. The footage was from a tiny camera lens hidden inside the molding of the living room ceiling. It was a wide-angle shot of my own home. I saw my wife, Adeline, sitting on the sofa. She wasn't alone. Her mother, Margaret, and her younger sister, Jessica, were there with her. They were clinking glasses of expensive champagne. My stomach dropped as I realized the date and time on the screen. This was recorded just 2 hours ago, while I was at the hardware store. I felt a cold, numbing sensation wash over me. These were the people I had invited into my life. These were the people I had supported, fed, and loved. And here they were, in my own home, plotting to strip me of my dignity, my finances, and my shelter. Miller looked at me and asked if I wanted him to delete it or give me the link. I told him to give me the link and never tell a soul we spoke. I walked out of that apartment a different man. I wasn't just a husband anymore. I was an operative in my own home. I had to go back there, look Adeline in the eye, and pretend that my world hadn't just shattered into a million jagged pieces. When I pulled back into the driveway, I saw Adeline through the window. She was humming to herself, moving a vase of flowers. To anyone else, she looked like the perfect, happy wife. To me, she looked like a shark in a sundress. I took a deep breath, forced a smile onto my face, and walked inside. She ran over and kissed me, asking if I found the right light fixtures. I told her the store didn't have them in stock and I'd have to order them online. I felt disgusted by her touch, but I knew I couldn't let it show. One wrong look, one hint of suspicion, and they would accelerate their plan before I could protect myself. That night, while they thought I was sleeping, I stayed up in my home office with the door locked, ostensibly catching up on work. In reality, I was preparing to gather more information. Over the next few days, I learned more about the details of their plan. The stuff I heard confirmed the initial video and revealed even more about their intentions. They discussed how to gaslight me into thinking I was becoming forgetful so that when I eventually noticed the money missing, I'd doubt my own sanity. I heard Jessica joking about which one of my cars she was going to take for herself. I spent my days at work meeting with a lawyer I'd hired in secret. His name was Marcus, and he was the kind of guy who lived for cases like this. When I shared what I knew, he actually whistled. He told me that in our state, the evidence of intent to defraud, combined with the conspiracy, was enough to not only win a divorce but to potentially put all 3 of them behind bars. But Marcus advised me to wait. He wanted them to actually attempt the filing. He wanted the trap to be so airtight that there was no way for them to wiggle out of it. I had to play the part of the fool for another 10 days. It was the most exhausting performance of my life. Adeline would bring me house documents to sign while I was distracted by the television or eating dinner. She'd say things like, "Oh, honey, this is just for the new alarm system," or "This is just a standard homeowners association form." I would look at the papers, and hidden deep within the fine print were clauses. For power of attorney, and transfer of interest. Instead of refusing to sign, I followed Marcus's instructions. I had prepared a set of dummy papers that looked identical to hers, but had one crucial difference. And I had a private investigator sitting in a car down the street recording her taking those signed papers out of the house. I let her think she was winning. I let her think I was the easiest mark she'd ever found. One afternoon, I came home early and caught the three of them in the dining room. They had a stack of my bank statements spread out on the table. They didn't hear me come in through the garage. I stood in the hallway and listened. I quietly backed out and went back to the garage, then slammed the door loudly as if I had just arrived. By the time I walked into the kitchen, the table was cleared and they were all sipping tea like nothing had happened. Adeline gave me a bright smile and told me someone was just over to help her with some tax prep. I nodded, told the person it was nice to see them, and even offered them a drink. Inside, I was screaming, but outside, I was as calm as a frozen lake. I knew that every move they made was being documented. I was moving my own money out of our joint accounts and into a secure trust that Marcus had set up, leaving just enough in the main accounts to keep them from panicking. The climax of their plan was supposed to be a celebratory dinner on a Friday night. They thought that by Monday, they would be filing the deed and I would be getting a surprise eviction notice. They invited me to sit down at the table, and they had cooked a massive meal. Margaret was acting especially motherly, telling me how lucky Adeline was to have a husband who worked so hard. It took everything in me not to throw my wine in her face. Halfway through the main course, Adeline stood up and made a toast. To the future, she said, clinking her glass against mine. To a life where we finally get everything we deserve. I stood up too, holding my glass. I looked at her, then at Margaret, then at Jessica. I said I couldn't agree more. Everyone should get exactly what they deserve. And that's why I invited a few extra guests to dessert. The front door opened. In walked Marcus, my lawyer, followed by 2 investigators and a process server. The look on Adeline's face was something I will never forget. The color drained from her cheeks so fast I thought she might faint. Margaret tried to stand up and yell, asking who these people were and how they got in. Marcus just held up a folder and said, "I'm the man who's been gathering evidence against you." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I pressed play on a Bluetooth speaker I had hidden behind a plant. The room was filled with recordings confirming their plan. The silence that followed was heavy. Jessica started sobbing, and Margaret began shouting that the recordings were illegal. Marcus just smiled and said, "Not when there is evidence of intent to commit a crime." The process server began handing out the envelopes. Adeline was served with an immediate filing for divorce on the grounds of criminal fraud and conspiracy. Margaret and Jessica were served with civil lawsuits for their roles in the attempted theft. But the kicker was when Marcus told them that the papers Adeline thought she had filed that morning were already flagged by the county clerk's office as fraudulent. We had gotten ahead of them. I looked at Adeline, who was now shaking, and told her that she had 1 hour to pack a single suitcase. I told her that because of the morality and fraud clause in our prenuptial agreement, which she apparently hadn't read as closely as I did, she was entitled to 0 alimony and 0 assets from the marriage. I had already contacted her employer, a high-end real estate firm, and informed them of the pending fraud charges. Her career was over. Her social standing was over. Her plan to leave me homeless had resulted in her being the one with nowhere to go. Watching them drag their bags down the driveway in the dark was the most satisfying moment of my life. Margaret was screaming at Adeline, blaming her for getting caught. Jessica was crying about how she was going to pay her car note. They piled into Margaret's old sedan and sped off, leaving me standing on the porch of the house they tried to steal. I went back inside, sat down at the table, and finished my wine in the most peaceful silence I had ever experienced. I'm still in that house today. The lesson about trust was a hard one, but I also learned that no matter how good a predator thinks they are, they're never as smart as they think. They thought I was a victim, but I was just the man holding the map to the trap they walked right into. They never saw it coming, and that's the sweetest part of all. If you felt even a fraction of what I went through, don't just watch and leave. Click subscribe so you can follow more real-life stories of betrayal, justice, and survival. Like the video if you believe the truth always comes out, and tell me in the comments, have you ever been betrayed by someone close to you?